We're just about ready to get started. So, first of all, let me, I'll double check with my crew if we're good to go. All right. Well, let me start out with just a big thank you for all of you who are here with us live at the Highlands Ranch Library. There, hopefully, lots of folks also joining us streaming live on our website. So hopefully this is a big community watching tonight. This is something totally special and new for us to try. We thought it'd be a kick. Channel 12 has worked with Highlands Ranch Library in the last couple of summers, and we thought it'd be fun to do a live event when talking with our working group led by our friend Tina Poliseo, who I know is here. We thought, it'd be great if we got around the election time and we had some people to talk about political issues, but weren't necessarily with campaigns. I go, I think I have an idea, some folks that might be able to fit that bill. So that's what we kind of came up with that, and we've got our crew taking care of business. So we are live streaming, but we're intending this to be an interactive experience. What we figured is we would go through a little bit of the show that we taped earlier today that some folks will be seeing at 8 o'clock. And then also open it up to questions for all of you. Now we'll stick to the topics that we're talking about for the first good deal of the program we have between 7 and 8 tonight. But we'll save some time at the end of the show, probably close to about 7:45 or so, to open up to questions about anything. About how we prepare for the show, other stories that have come up, other part of our cast of characters that aren't here tonight. Of course, we have different folks that join us from week to week. So, please have different questions you have in mind. And you already met our floor director, Sarah Newberry. She'll be helping to pass around a microphone so we can hear your question when you have it. So without further ado, let me first, they probably don't need any introduction, but I'll do that as we get into our first take. Our short take tonight is going to be taking a look at Judge Carlos Samore. He made a ruling this week. You may know this now being live TV, that there's a little, we'll adjust that a little bit here. And there we are. So, as I was saying, our first take tonight is taking a quick look at Judge Carlos Samore, who ruled this week that audio and video of the trial of the Aurora movie theater shooter will be available via security camera in the trial that's hopefully upcoming in December. And as always, we start with our friend Patty Calhoun from Westward. Patty, what do you think of this idea that it's just going to be the one camera, even though the defense and the prosecution both argued against any cameras in the courtroom?
Well, and as we know, cameras are not remotely distracting in any event. The sound always works. I think it's great that it's a good compromise. I think that way people can actually see what's going on. They'll know they're not going to rely on courtroom drawings. It will not be that disruptive. I think more access to information is better.
David Kopel from DU Law School and Independence Institute. You're one of our two lawyers on our panel tonight. What did you make of the idea that even though there were victims' families and both sides argued against it to Judge Samore?
Well, it's got pros and cons. The cons are anything that would make Nancy Grace happy is necessarily bad for society. And this will be her show for several weeks. Secondly, as Justice Scalia said at the University of Colorado Law School a few days ago, it's really wrong to take people's suffering and turn it into entertainment. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, our Constitution says the trials should be open to the public, and as a practical matter, this is a good way to do that. It's going to be like a lot of courtrooms have a fixed camera that is operated by the court, not even a pool camera, from one TV station, that always, anyway, if there's an overflow in the courtroom, broadcasts on closed circuit to another room in the courthouse, and can never look at the jury. Mm-hmm. And it also gets shut off when there's a conference that's not for the public, when the judge calls the lawyers up to the front. So as a way to do it, I think it's a prudent and reasonable way.
Eric Sonneman, our political analyst, do you think this is going to be a compromise that the community will embrace?
Well, I think there'll be some people out there who want less and think, for reasons David articulated, there should be no cameras. And there are some people who think, CNN ought to be able to show up with a crew of 100 people and cameras, on everyone. I think it's probably a reasonable compromise. Their interest, the prosecution has interest here, the defense has interest, the victim families have interest, but there's also a public interest that I think needs to be served. David articulated that you know, that trials should be open and these are not secret proceedings. So I think it's a reasonable compromise. My biggest point about this whole trial is let's get on with it. By the time the trial rolls around, it will have been 2.5 years since the crime, since the incident. It is far from a whodunit. And justice in this society ought to move a lot swifter than it sometimes does.
You're here. And completing our panel, Penfield Tate, attorney with Greenberg Trial Rig, also a longtime former state lawmaker. Penn, as our other attorney on the panel tonight, do you feel this was the appropriate compromise from Judge Samore?
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say appropriate, but I think it's not surprising. It is clear, and I often think back to the O.J. trial many years ago. It seemed like that was the start of really publicizing and televising big events, and so the trial actually became a media event. I remember people sitting around all day long watching the trial and talking about it all evening. But I'm a little bit disturbed because, and I think Patty's point about, or I think David's about televising people's suffering, but as a society, I don't know, I think we've missed the point. You've got, you know, all of these judge this and judge that shows, and people show up and act crazy, and judges make rulings and slam down gavels, and I don't know if that's necessarily a positive in our society. And I agree with David. I mean, at the founding of the country, we wanted public trials to avoid the secret tribunals where the king was, you know, judge, jury, and executioner. But I don't think our founders ever contemplated where media and technology would take us to this day and age. And I don't know, I guess they're going to have to sequester the jury the entire time, because if you televise this trial, you've got to be really, really careful about the jury being tainted if they go home in the evening. And that's a burden on the jury.
That's a good point. Well, let's get to it. Our first topic tonight is that John Hicklooper and Bob Beaupre debated on Tuesday in an event that was hosted by the Denver Post. Higher education, the new driver's license program for illegal immigrants, and the death penalty were among the topics that made headlines. And since the Denver Post owned the headlines, it's pretty easy to make those. A comment made from Beaupre claiming that IUDs cause abortions also made significant news after the debate. Patty, it seemed that while a lot of those issues were important, that IUD comment from Beaupre gathered the most attention. What do you think?
Well, it gathered the most attention because I think it was something people could really, well, they couldn't understand it because it didn't make a lot of sense, but it's an issue that really matters to people on both sides of the issue, on pro-life, pro-choice. We all learned a new word, abortion, abortifacient. We looked it up. I don't think he'd looked it up that closely because it is not, an IUD is not inducing abortions, depending on if you're David, you get David's definition or not. But I think it was
over a month to go to have that theme in the governor's race. From his own party, and I think from the public, more of a desire to say, well, if you're such a, a strong leader and all this kind of thing, would you maybe have some opinion that has a point to it rather than being like the rounded edges of a spoon, or are you only going to say things that you've poll tested that 51% or more of the people agree with? Colorado is on the whole not a pro-life state. It's against public funding for abortion. So the fact that he had an opinion that clearly puts him on the minority side of something is sort of refreshing. As Patty said, if you read a medical textbook, what an IUD does, which is prevent the implantation of a fertilized egg, is not an abortion by medical terminology. By the concerns of people who would be against abortion, it's the same thing, whatever you call it, because you're intentionally destroying what they see as a human life, an individual with complete and final DNA. And whether you do that destruction before or after implantation on the uterine wall would be, from the anti-abortion point of view, not very relevant.
Eric, to date, Beaupre kind of escaped what was usually the ads that you've seen against Gardner on this issue, against Kaufman on this issue. It sounds like that good luck has run out for Mr. Beaupre.
Well, I think what put Bob Beaupre largely in this race is the same thing that might be his undoing, which is what put him in the race were John Hickenlooper's unforced errors.
Right.
And now he has somewhat of an unforced error of his own. As Patty indicated, the early part of the debate, Hickenlooper was doing sort of his vintage, although it wasn't as effective as his usual vintage, aw shucks, quirky, self-deprecating self. I think there's a point to which people are almost tired of that. And what was endearing 10 years ago when he was this fresh new mayor on the scene, or even when he was a new governor, is not what voters are necessarily looking for, given some of the question marks that have been raised around him at this point in time. They're looking for a little more firmness, decisiveness, articulation of what a second term would be like, etc. But then Bob Beaupre did him the ultimate favor later in the debate by wandering into this territory that I suspect he didn't want to wander. I'm sure his consultants and staff in the back room were pulling their hair out as he was going down that road, the road to nowhere. The Democratic ticket in this state for years and years now, and elsewhere, but particularly in Colorado, has been to run hard, extremely hard, on the reproductive rights issues, broadly defined social issues, and to try to pick off largely suburban, largely moderate, sometimes independent, sometimes moderate Republican voters who might otherwise be attracted to the Republican candidate, but they're able to pick them off on these issues. That is why Michael Bennet is in the U.S. Senate instead of Ken Buck, in what was a good Republican year nationally, and Bennet managed to win that race by 20,000 votes. This is not the ground on which Bob Beaupre wants to fight, but you can be sure that, John Hickenlooper won't do it because of his brand and no negative ads and all the rest, but plenty of people on Hickenlooper's behalf will be reminding you of this on a daily basis.
Ken, before we throw it to the audience for some questions, what do you make of what happened in the debates and what's going on with the governor's race so far?
You know, I agree with much of what's been said. It's interesting, since we taped the show this morning, the Post has endorsed Hickenlooper in the governor's race. They did that this afternoon. So that's sort of breaking news. But in many ways, I agree with Eric. For Bob Beaupre, this is an unforced error, and it's clearly territory he didn't want to go into as the Republican candidate. And Eric's right. The Democratic Party has run on this reproductive rights issue for a couple of reasons historically. Number one, they're where the vast majority of Coloradans are. And number two, they know that some of the candidates that the Republican Party chooses are counter to where the vast majority of Coloradans are on this issue. What remains to be seen is if it's going to be the decisive issue for enough voters to carry Hickenlooper to a victory. I don't know just yet. There's an interesting thing, I think, that may be going on here, and I don't think Beaupre went into this intentionally, but just as Eric talked about the governor's style and it's sort of folksy and some would almost say kind of a goofball charm, I think that has worn thin with people, and I think what Beaupre is trying to do is not necessarily portray himself as a leader in terms of strictly imagery. I think he's actually trying to stake out certain positions and make a definitive stand and sort of take the position, you know, Coloradans may not agree with me, but so what? This is where the chips fall as far as I'm concerned. This is what I believe. Take me or leave me. Now, Coloradans may say we leave you, because we don't agree with you on enough of these issues to elect you as governor. But I think he's making a calculated risk here and saying, I'm just going to be definitive on a whole bunch of things and see if I can either brand the governor as too squishy and make him appear indecisive, or just hope that some of my issues stick with people. I don't know if it's going to work, and I think it's a high-stakes gamble because I think his people sense he's far enough behind the 8 ball that he's got to do something that's a game changer. But that what he did at the debate may not have been the game changer in his favor, though.
Well, this is the part we never get to do when we're taping at noon, or you never get to do when you're watching at home, is to ask a question that might be related to what we just talked about. We'll certainly get a chance to talk more about different parts of the program, but if there's any questions specifically about the governor's race or the debates or anything we just talked about, feel free to say so. Oh, perfect. We'll get a microphone over to you. Go ahead.
It is said that $20 million will be spent on advertising. What does this $20 million really buy beside airtime?
Well, that's a great
Let's talk
question.
about cost benefit.
Okay. We have some great analysis up here. Who wants to take first whack at that one? Eric, you've led a lot of campaigns. Want to give the first shot?
There's no line that money is the mother's milk of politics. That is far, far too often true. I think in a lot of these campaigns these days, it reminds me of the old situation between the U.S. and the Soviet Union at that point in time, the phraseology of MAD, mutually assured destruction. And both sides have so much money and so much in their arsenal, so much opposition research on all the foibles of the opponent, that you just fire and fire and fire away, and you hesitate to quit firing because you don't want to let the other guy run in a vacuum. It's demeaning to the process. It makes it harder to govern. We could go on all night about why it is so hard to govern these days. There are multiple reasons: gerrymandered districts, media, unlike Channel 12 and all of you here, but media that is so partisan, whether it's partisan on the left or partisan on the right, et cetera. But one of the reasons it's so hard to govern is you spend so many months bloodying each other up brutally, and then expect, after the election for peace to magically break out.
One of the things it does is it enriches television stations and radio
Commercial
stations.
television
Yes,
stations.
commercial, not Channel 12, which is far too pure to do that. And it also enriches campaign consultants. You have Karl Rove had in his column in the Wall Street Journal a week or two ago, lamented the fact that Democratic big money going into super PACs to buy dishonest, scurrilous ads is larger than the amount of Republican money going into that, which is true. And he was sort of urging people to pony up on the Republican side of that. Although one of the things omitted is, as one of those consultants, you break off a fee every time you buy an ad. So of course he would be in favor of more money for that. Sometimes campaigns put so much money into ads which try to chase that dwindling number of genuinely clueless people who have no opinion even this late. I would think that after 4 years, anybody who should be voting would already have an opinion about whether or not John Hickenlooper's a good governor or not and deserves re-election and shouldn't be influenced by some last-minute ad. And I would suggest that parties would do better when they put that money in to get out the vote. And the Democrats have, in this state and nationally, have done an outstanding job on that. And my prediction is the election for the governor and then the Senate will come down to whether the Republicans' ground game matches the Democratic one, as the party leadership is now saying it will, or once again falls flat and you have something like the catastrophe of Romney's get out the vote software crashing on the afternoon of the election.
The other thing that I think that happens is, as you talk to consultants and others in the political process, they'll tell you a couple things. We run these horrible, ugly ads because they work. Voters watch them, they pay attention to them, and the negatives on a candidate will rise based on these ads, so you see more of them. And it's disheartening because, in the Senate race in particular, these are two guys who I served with both of them at some point in the legislature. I don't even recognize them anymore based on what the ads tell you. And so that's why you see it. The other thing is we need better turnout. The reality is if more people voted and voted based on having at least examined the issues and the candidates a little bit, these ads would matter less. Because the ads are trying to appeal to that small segment of people, like David said, who are genuinely clueless and are trying to make up their mind at the last minute, and they're hoping the ad sways enough of them to go out and change the result in the poll.
And the other thing that has changed so much and why they need to run them for so long is the ballots come out next week. They come out on the 14th. So some people will start voting than it used to be. You could save everything up towards the end because people would be voting just on that first Tuesday in November. And now it is a game changer for how you have to structure your entire campaign. So they put out all the nasty stuff early. In John Hickenlooper's case, it's very handy that there is a lot of money coming in because he's not going to run the negative ads,
right,
but he knows other people will. But I think they've said $60 million is what's been come in from outside so far for the whole campaign, not just advertising. So we're going to see, it's not going to be safe to answer your door because someone's going to be knocking on it, to answer your phone because it's going to be someone calling you about voting, and certainly not to watch television.
That's true.
Unless
you're
it's Channel 12.
There you go.
Well, you can answer your phone, but it'll be a robocall, so you can hang up on it.
Well, let's keep rolling to our second topic, which of course was disputes over curriculum and pay raises continued in Jefferson County schools this week, prompting sick-outs by teachers that canceled classes at 2 high schools. The school board held a meeting on Thursday, just last night, to announce its decision to move forward with a proposed curriculum committee, and that's a curriculum review committee. David, start us off on this one. It doesn't look like that the board is backing down, even though we've had many of the sick-outs and protests from students. What do you think?
Well, the board, certainly no school board should change its policy based on teachers illegally walking off the job. And I think the ones who were not actually sick should certainly be docked in their pay. The National Education Association has brought in a whole bunch of consultants to gin up a campaign against the Jefferson County School Board, which is sensible from their point of interests. This dispute is about a change in the teacher pay system, of going from an automatic step increase, which is purely based on how long you've been there, and on a grid then with your whatever academic degree you have, to one that is based on merit pay. Now, I think the Jeffco merit pay system is flawed because 98% of teachers are getting a merit raise. I'm not sure the quality of teaching at Jefferson County schools is that deep that there's only 2% who are not effective or are merely partially effective or worse. Julie Williams of the Jefferson County School Board is on the right side of the pay issue and massively destructive to her own cause with that ridiculous curriculum proposal she put out about U.S. history, saying, don't talk about civil disobedience and things like that. That's a huge part of our country's history, from the giant strikes we had in 1877 and on and on and on. And back to the fact that the reason we're teaching U.S. history instead of North American colonies history is we had an armed revolution. So she was absolutely wrong about that, and I'm glad. And then the protesters are right to criticize that, and the board was right to reject her idea and say we're going to evaluate the new history curriculum to see if it's accurate and presents both sides.
Eric, I didn't know what the effects of these different walkouts and sickouts were going to be. It seemed that there was a lot of pressure coming at the board, but it didn't look like there was a whole lot of backing down, although I guess the original proposal had been modified. What do you think?
I think the people who are cheering loudest for the Jefferson County mess right now are people in Douglas County, because all of a sudden the focus is off of Douglas County. Everyone's writing and talking about something else. More serious note, first of all, David's right. We used, when we were talking about the governor's race, we used the phrase unforced errors. This was an unforced error on the new board majority's part in Jefferson County. You only have, whether you have a 5-0 board or in this case a 3-2 board, you only have so much political capital to spend. And you want to spend it wisely and strategically. And if the issue is decertifying the union or upcoming contract negotiations for a master contract, or the pay scale and whether it's going to be step increases or something that where there's more attention to real merit and not just 98% of teachers pass, or whatever. You need to harbor your resources and harbor your goodwill for that fight and not fritter it away on some of these tangential issues. I don't have any problem with a curriculum review process. Now, fortunately, the Jeffco board, under a lot of pressure, has revised the process so that it's not loaded up with all these buzzwords about promoting patriotism and respect for authority and not talking about dissent and all kinds of wacky stuff like that. The notion of a curriculum review process is not inherently bad. I mean, curriculum, whether it's history curriculum or any curriculum, does not come down on stone tablets. It is made up as you go. It's made up by people, a lot of people who are wise and learned in their profession, and probably some who aren't so much. So there's nothing inherently wrong with reviewing curriculum from time to time. But this has been a comedy of errors in terms of how it's been handled over the last year, and I don't know what the end game is. I don't see the air going out of this balloon in terms of the teachers, the students who are out protesting. I don't see any of that abating anytime soon.
Penn, do you see the modification of the proposal as a step back from what they were doing, or do they double down?
No, I think it is a step back, and I've said all along, the problem with Jefferson County, in my opinion, and part of what drives this controversy, I don't think it's an unforced error. I think you have a board that has missed the point of why they're there. Typically, a board of education, a school board, is designed to help set policy but help manage the public education process so that kids get a quality education and can be productive members of society. The problem this board is faced with is they've got an intentional agenda of trying to program what the kids think, what the kids believe based on what they're taught, and they're trying to direct it and drive it down, and now they sit around and act astonished that people are revolting, and even kids have enough sense to protest and say, no, we won't even let our parents tell us what to do. We're not going to let you tell us what to think. And when you look at this, having worked in politics, there's no way Julie Williams sat around and just said, I have an interesting idea. Let me throw it out there and see what happens. She locked in votes. When she went with this proposal, she knew she had the votes to get it passed. What she miscalculated is that students and teachers and parents would look at this and say, this is bonkers. You're not going to do this to our kids. And that the kids would say, you're not going to do this to us. And I think what also reveals the thinking of this board is to have one of the board members say that the students are just pawns of the teacher. And the students had enough sense to say, we're not pawns. We've tried to tell you this. Our parents can't tell us what to do. The teachers aren't going to tell us what to do. We're not going to accept this curriculum adjustment. So when the board modified the proposal, they did have to step back, and I think they're going to have to rethink whether they want to be responsive to their constituents, which is students and parents and families and, yes, teachers, or if they're still going to try to drive the agenda and tell everybody it's their way or the highway. They're going to end up getting recalled or at the very least voted out of office next time they come up for re-election.
Patty, wrap it up for us.
Well, moving aside the pay policies, which is something you want a board to be able to discuss. Ideally, you want them to do it in a sensible way, and I have no faith that this board will be able to. What Julie Williams initially proposed was cracked. There is no question. She is not just talking about looking at history. She's talking about a review of the AP U.S. History class, which is a curriculum that you have to follow if you're going to get credit, college credit. It's a national program. This is it. It's a big program. It is very in-depth. It gives the teachers some room. It gives the schools some room on what they can do. But if you look at it, and it'll take you a little while, it's a pretty good program. So her original plan was to look specifically at this curriculum, which is national, and also to look at elementary health. There's no one you would rather have do science and sex ed than Julie Williams in Jefferson County. So, and then she said what we really should be modeling ourselves more after Texas, which is another really good idea. So that's what got everyone so concerned in the first place. So they had pulled back, another board member had pulled it back to let's just have a curriculum committee, look at some of this stuff. But the irony is the superintendent, McMenemy, who they had appointed, pointed out, we actually have two committees that would do this already. We do not need a curriculum committee. So his own people, his own board are not paying attention to him right now. So I think we're going to have some big fights still coming, which will be great for us.
Which will be great for us.
Not good for Jefferson County, great for us.
Not good for Jeffco. Are there any quick questions we should tackle before we get to our next topic?
I believe, Patty, we're talking about making entertainment out of other people's suffering.
In Jefferson County, I think that's
Yeah.
all right.
Well, let's
With
go.
the cameras.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't see any hands, so we'll just keep rolling. Topic 3 tonight, a case involving a quadriplegic medical marijuana patient who was fired from Dish Network in 2010 was brought before the Colorado Supreme Court this week. Dish fired Brandon Coates under its zero tolerance policy for employees' use of illegal drugs. Coates is challenging his termination based on Colorado's law that protects employees from being fired for doing legal activities off the clock. Eric, this is just the beginning part, seeing that's just being now looked at by the Colorado Supreme Court, but do you think this is going to affect other businesses? Is this going to get a lot of attention being, Colorado is one of the 2 pot states in America?
Well, I'm sitting here between 2 attorneys. I'm going to talk to you later, Dominic, about maybe some hazard pay for that, for being sandwiched like that. So somewhat I'll refer to David and Penn for the legal analysis of this. And, there is not yet a final decision, and we'll have to see where the courts rule. You could not find a more sympathetic and reasonable and justified plaintiff than this particular plaintiff. He's a quadriplegic, by all reports, a decent, good employee of Dish Network. And what the real issue in a nutshell, at least as I understand it from my non-attorney point of view, is what is legal behavior constitute? And under state law, where medical marijuana, as we all know, is legal, does state law trump federal law where it's not illegal or not? And I think that's ultimately the issue that gets adjudicated here.
Penn?
Yeah, Eric's right. This is an interesting case, and for the life of me, I can't fathom why Dish Network decided to go here politically. You've got a quadriplegic who is using medical marijuana, so we're not talking about personal use. Now, we've all heard all the stories about how once we approved medical marijuana in the state, the percentage of young men between 18 and 34 who had life-altering pain and needed something to deal with it sort of escalated by 200% so they could get prescriptions. We don't have that here. We have someone with a real medical condition, and on his own time, off the clock, he's doing something that's prescribed medication for him, and he gets fired for it. And Dish's only claim is that, well, it's illegal under federal law. But Colorado law doesn't allow you to fire someone who engages in lawful behavior off their job site. And once we approve medical marijuana in this state, a number of employers altered their personnel policies so that you could use medical marijuana on your time, but there was a standard. If you came into work and they random tested you, and you were inebriated or under the influence, they could take disciplinary action. And by all accounts, that's not what's going on here. He tested and they found it, but it didn't impair his functioning on the job. So I don't know where the court's going to go on this, quite frankly. I don't know if they're going to yield to federal law, which will be interesting because even the federal government is not prosecuting certain marijuana-related activity in our state and in Washington. Or if they're going to just uphold Colorado law. But the real puzzler here is why Dish Network would even want to go here.
Patty, I realize that analyzing marijuana issues is a whole new ballgame for you, but still, try to give us your point of view on this one.
Because we have no advertising for marijuana. If you ever can find westward down here, you'll find many of the fine dispensaries in Colorado advertising. This is such a difficult one. I have to go with Penn. Why they took this case, because here's this man, you know exactly why medical marijuana is good for him in the condition he's in as a quadriplegic. You also have the issue is you do a test, but if marijuana shows up in your system, there's no indication that you used, it could have been 30 days ago that he used it. He's not going to test, you're not going to be able to tell if he's impaired the same way if this were vodka and I had just been swinging it all night. How I'd be more incoherent than I am already. So I think this is a really interesting test case. I think the court will come down on the side of Colorado law that the worker cannot be punished for what they do off duty, and medical marijuana is legal here. And this is a man who needs it.
David, you have experience with both the state Supreme Court and the U.S. Supreme Court.
marijuana.
And marijuana. So, according to sources at Westward. Do you, how
I
long
did
do you,
not do that in the Supreme Court. That's a false rumor.
Didn't inhale.
how long do you think it'll be? I realize that there's no way to exactly predict, but how long do you think it'll be before we hear the judgment from the state Supreme Court?
Oh, I think you can count on at least a half year, typically. Sometimes they're faster, but this is a very tough case legally. There's really good arguments on both sides. And it's not something where they can just say, we'll do what the legislature told us, because the legislature, when they passed this law saying don't fire people for legal activities off the job, I don't think really even thought about the potential of the state-federal conflict. Actually, Colorado is one of 3 states where marijuana is legal. It's been legal in Alaska for 39 years for personal possession in the home, although not for commercial sales. So by land mass, it's already been re-legalized in about a third of the United States. I blame, as is so often the case in George Bush, in this case, George H.W. Bush, because he was the one who took the Nancy Reagan war on drugs, and which was crazy enough already, starting in '86, and ramped it up even higher and did everything possible to encourage private employers to drug test their employees. DISH is following the Nancy Reagan, George H.W. Bush policy of intruding through chemical detection into what their employees do off the job. I think that's reprehensible in general, particularly so in how DISH applied it, but that's the Reagan-Bush thing of zero tolerance. We don't care about individual human circumstances because we're so fanatic on this. You can test somebody for impairment with all kinds of computer tests, and these have been around for decades. To test if somebody's fit to do the job, you don't have to biochemically monitor them. You can give them a performance test on the job, and in the long run, this state should take the right stand for workers' rights and say not only is it you can't be fired for doing what's legal off the job, your employer can't spy into your chemistry to find out what you're doing off the job.
Any questions on this before we get to our next topic? All right, well, this next topic, okay, we'll go ahead.
Actually, so
Sarah?
just as on a national level, do you think the recreational marijuana legislation being passed in Colorado, do you think it's hurt or helped our state? I know we're getting the tax revenues, but is it worth all these other headaches that we've now?
I'm going to throw it to the experts, Patty.
Well, if you look at the number of people who are moving here and how much rents are going up, I think you can safely say it's not hurting this state.
Man does not live by bread alone, and whether the effect, I think it has had a positive effect on tourism and on the economy, but the point is we shouldn't be giving people, in my view, criminal records for personal behavior that doesn't harm other people.
I'd suggest we won't know the answer to your question, Sarah, for 10 or 20 years. We won't know about youth addiction rates, youth usage rates, what the long-term impact on this state is. We're, 9 months into this experiment? It is way too early to pass judgment.
And I begin by saying I'm in complete agreement with David on this one of the few areas where we completely agree. But Sarah, if your question is specifically, has it hurt Colorado, I would offer that the answer is no. Many chambers of commerce, and I sat for years on the board of the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, people were petrified and horrified that we'd lose, major companies moving here, people wouldn't come here for tourist reasons and things of that nature. None of that has happened. You keep seeing announcements of all of these companies that are moving here. People are moving here in droves. Tourism has not dropped off at all. So it hasn't hurt us really from a perception point of view. You still see some of the late night comics joke about Colorado and Washington, but it hasn't stopped people from coming and the economy from growing. And I think part of the reason why is, I disagree with Eric. I don't think we'll have to wait 20 years to see. I suspect legalizing marijuana it's a wave that has started. Colorado and Washington and Alaska are the forefront. It's on a ballot in several states. And I think over time, I would be surprised if in 10 years we didn't have some national policy change that just made it legal in all 50 states.
And you might well be right, but that doesn't obviate the question, of whether it's healthy or not, which is going to take time to tell.
The health issue in terms of health on individuals who engage is a separate question from whether it hurts Colorado. I don't think it's hurt Colorado economically in that respect yet.
I think we have one more, well, we have a couple more questions. Go ahead.
Well, you won't have to wait 20 years to feel the effects because my whole family is coming to Colorado to our house for Christmas. Thank you very much.
They didn't include that part of the bill of the impact of in-laws.
You must make some wild Christmas cookies.
That'll be Christmas brownies this year. So.
I think we had another question over here, and then we'll get rolling to our next topic.
I've always heard that Colorado is an at-will state, so that the employer can simply say, you're fired, doesn't even have to give any reasons. So I'm kind of wondering why Dish Network then even gave reasons why they fired this guy. I mean, I really don't think they should have, don't get me wrong with that. And then also, do you think that employees will protest that we are being big brothered by employers, that some places you gotta go through that drug testing before you even get the job, they want background checks, all that, and I'm just wondering, because jobs are so scarce, are we as people who want jobs, pay our bills, we're gonna hide in our houses and say, oh, knock on someone else's door, it doesn't affect me. David,
you're talking about this, you wanna tackle this one?
Yeah, I think you're right that the present state of unemployment exacerbates things, and I know there's the official unemployment rate's down, but if you look at the number of people who that's heavily to do with the number of people who've just gotten discouraged and dropped out of the job market. So you're right, it is a tight job market, and that makes it easier for the employer to be oppressive under whatever conditions. You're also exactly right that Colorado, as I think it absolutely should be, is an at-will state where, unlike in France, if you fire somebody because you think they're doing a lousy job, you don't have to end up in some tribunal to prove it and document it. But we limit, I think rightly, at-will for certain things. Like you can fire somebody for any reason, but not for a bad reason. In particular, you couldn't fire somebody because of their race, in Colorado because of their sexual orientation, or their religion, things like that. And we've, I think, legitimately added, don't fire somebody because of their off-the-job behavior that doesn't have anything to do with their job.
I'm going to keep us rolling. We're going to do a short take on this next one. If you watch the show tonight at 8 o'clock, I don't want anyone to race home to try to do that. This wasn't included. This was actually part of our post-game segment, which we do every week that's only available online. We do that if you follow Colorado Public Television or myself on Twitter. We tweet that out every afternoon. And it's just an extra segment that we do at the end of every show. Let's get a quick take on Representative Doug Lamborn, who drew fire this week for his comments at a gathering in Colorado Springs, where he encouraged generals to resign in a blaze of glory to protest the foreign policy strategy of President Obama. And I believe, Penn, you get the first whack at this one.
Yeah, and I got pretty worked up about this earlier today. So I'll take ownership. Doug and I served together in the State House and the State Senate, and we often disagreed on most every policy issue. But I think his recent statement, it's bonkers, and Doug knows better. And I have a biased view. I grew up an Army brat for many years, and so I grew up on military bases around the world. And what I find, there are several things that trouble me about this with Doug. Number one, he's in a public forum when he's got someone there arguing or insinuating that the president is part of the Muslim Brotherhood or something, some sort of terrorist organization. He should have just tamped that down immediately. That's, as a U.S. congressperson, that should have been offensive to him to hear someone say that. But then to say that generals ought to resign in a blaze of glory to protest public policy decisions being affected by this country is even more disturbing, because we have a country that's founded on the principle of civilian control of the military. Indeed, I would tell Doug civilian control of the military is what separates us from many of the Middle Eastern states where he disagrees with how we're handling foreign policy. So he's now telling our military to act like their military. We've got civilian control of the military, not military control of the military, for a good reason. Doug's comments were bonkers, they were shameful. He owes all of us an apology, and he owes his constituents an apology. It should have never been said.
Patty?
The only resignation we would like to see in a blaze of glory here is Doug Lamborn's. First of all, it would open up Colorado Springs and El Paso County to actually having, might be a conservative, but he wouldn't be a crackpot. And that's one of the problems with the way that district is. You get someone like Doug Lamborn, and he's going to be there as long as he wants to be, unless he resigns in a blaze of glory. And we're arguing against our own best interest, because of course we like to make fun of him as often as possible, and he gives us so much material, but it's not fair to the people down there.
More entertainment out of other people's suffering.
Exactly.
It's just the right people have to be suffering.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, the voters of El Paso County do not have to worry that their U.S. representative is some real calculating, shrewd mastermind like Frank Underwood in the TV show or Harry Reid and Mitch McConnell in real life. If you were trying to get generals to resign, to protest what maybe they and Lamborn both see as bad policy, you wouldn't say that in advance. That reduces the chance that he'll actually, as he said, working behind the scenes to convince somebody to do it, that he'll be successful.
Eric, wrap it up for us.
I really echo, everything that's been said, but particularly Penn's passion here and knowing Doug and having served with Doug the way Penn expressed it. It was shameful what he did, and in some respects what he didn't do by letting the guy go on and insinuating, inferring that the president, whatever you make of this president's foreign policy, and Lord knows it is open to criticism, but whatever you make of it, to be in a public forum and let some crackpot insinuate that he's an agent of the president's an agent of the Muslim Brotherhood, and not just shut that down immediately and basically say we're not going there, is shameful. On the show that we taped earlier today, I made Doug my disgrace of the week. That speaks for itself. I think the real issue here, and Patty touched lightly on it, is this is the evil of safe districts. I talked earlier this evening about many of the reasons why our political system is so broken as it seems to be now. Safe districts have to be high on that list. It forces representatives to the extremes of their party. Doug Lamborn never has to worry about being defeated by a Democrat. All he has to do is keep that ultra conservative base of the Republican Party happy so he doesn't get outflanked on the right and he has lifetime employment. In a safe Democratic district, you look at Denver, Diana Duguette's longtime representative there. Diana's a personal friend, even though we don't agree on a lot of politics, but Diana's whole political calculation is make sure no one beats her on the left flank. So it's what drives politics to the polarization we see these days is all of these safe districts that we have around the country. Doug's example number one.
Well, Eric gave a preview. Also, all of you know our favorite part of the show every week is Disgrace of the Week. Patty, as always, start us off.
Well, and I usually keep things close to home because there's so many disgraces in Colorado. We don't need to go outside our borders. But this week I had to go with the Secret Service. You know, that intruder could have gone in, heated up a pizza in the White House, jumped in the Lincoln bedroom. They would have tucked him in. I mean, it's unbelievable how they behaved.
David.
A trifecta of unusually brazen lies, even by political campaign standards this week. Cory Gardner's claim that he's not the sponsor of a personhood bill in the House, which is H.R. 1091, which I read and certainly is a personhood bill, and his name is on the sponsors list. The Democratic Governors Association ad against Bob Beaupre, claiming he drove a bank into trouble and is a big bank guy and all this, and a flagrant lie as debunked by the fact checkers. And the latest Bloomberg ad against Colorado Springs Senator Bernie Herpin, saying that Herpin took a $20,000 trip or tried to at taxpayer expense, as the Colorado Springs Gazette explained. Everything in that word, including the commas, is a lie. And besides, if you just read Bloomberg's interview in Rolling Stone, you'd know there are no roads in that district, so it's not like Herpin could ever get out of it anyway to go on vacation.
Eric.
Well, on the show today, I went after Doug Lamborn, but since I just did that a few seconds ago, I'll go in a different direction. Dominic and I are also co-hosting a Channel 12 series in conjunction with Channel 4 called Colorado Decides, which is a political debate series. Last week, we taped a debate on Amendment 68. I don't know when that airs or if it's aired yet, Dominic.
As we speak.
As we speak. I have to say, I mean, the two representatives on both sides of that debate acquitted themselves fairly well. But as an exercise in cynicism, I've rarely seen a ballot issue where both sides are quite as cynical as that one. The proponents of Amendment 68, it's the horse track gaming at Arapahoe Park, the proponents are selling it as $100 million or some number like that for education, where there is no education group anywhere in the state of Colorado that's on board this thing. The education piece of it is total window dressing. Obviously, the motive is about gambling and gambling revenues. It's not about solving the state's education system or crisis. The opponents, on the other hand, are nothing but a consortium of the state's biggest casinos who have all ponied up about $9 million as we speak to fund a campaign that the core message of which is the evils of gambling and casinos. So the cynicism on both sides is huge.
Ken?
I'd almost go for that. I sort of ask myself, if they're going to give away $100 million, how much are they going to make? But I'll stay with Doug Lamborn. I just found his, like I said, Doug knows better. And to pander to the worst part of society in that respect, and it's also denigrating and insulting to the military. As an elected U.S. congressperson, he needs to apologize, and he needs to do it publicly on TV.
Let's do our Say Something Nice quickly, and we'll open up to questions from the audience. Patty?
Well, no matter who is under the Golden Dome come January, they can look up and see the incredible job that has been done to preserve and renovate the Colorado Capitol. And it's open again for tours, so go up to the Dome, first time in 8 years.
David?
Public libraries, the epitome of that's what good government is for, to provide a public good that everyone can enjoy, and not just taken from X to give to Y because X has a bigger lobbyist than Y does.
Eric?
What a pander, David. I'll just go with the fact that the Colorado Rockies season is blessedly over.
And
Which
Penn?
is no surprise. Today we lost one of our I think, community treasures, a man by the name of Salvador Sal Carpio, former Denver City Councilman. He was the executive director of the Denver Housing Authority, passed away a week ago, and they had his funeral services today. He was on the vanguard of political change in this state when he was on the Denver City Council in the era when Federico Peña was being elected and coming into prominence, and politics really started changing in Denver and in this state. He is someone who will be greatly missed, and we may not see his like again for a long time.
Well, that is our show, but the nice thing about this version versus our regular version, we had a chance to talk to you a little bit more about something that's not topic related. So we'll open it up to folks that have any questions, whether it's about how we prepare for the show, what goes on. What I always call the very best material we have is before the cameras roll and right after the cameras roll. But even with Penn and David, we don't have a legal team big enough to defend ourselves if we air what is said there. But any questions that we could answer about the program or anything else you've seen? Any other folks on the thing? There's someone in back.
Thanks so much for coming. I'm interested in how you decide or get to your top topics.
Sure.
What kind of research or how you go about
Research?
It's a great question. Yeah, research is not encouraged at the table. No, my friend over there, give a little quick wave. That's my Gabrielle Bryant. She is the producer of our program. Her and I will write the script based on headlines that we see that week, issues that we think not only are a big deal, but something that we think the panel can chew on. If there's a big forest fire, well, that's bad. But if it's lightning strike that's caused it, there's not a whole lot to talk about it. But if there's some policy behind it, we can. So Wednesday and Thursday, we'll compose those. The script, as you see here, is just the topics that I read, and then we send it out to the panel, and that brings out a whole other iteration of editing because I'll throw it to them because we switch around of the order of the topics. We also have to be very timely. So if breaking news happens before noon on Friday, we will do our very best to include it. But I'll throw it to all of you of how, once you get the script, what you do with it, and also how we've made changes.
Well, for example, today, you could tell that Jefferson County was going to be so much more water cooler talk than the candidates debate, which was already 3 days old. So we actually moved up. Jefferson County was the first big topic we had today. And I think it might be next week, too.
Absolutely.
And I think what we hopefully do in the these email discussions that go on between Thursday afternoon and Friday at 11:52 is refine the questions to the extent we need to so that we contribute something useful. You know, that we pick topics where we can say something different from what we said the last week if we're doing a topic twice in a row, and a topic where the panel, whoever's on it that week, has the ability to advance public understanding rather than just sort of, you know, repeat pro-con talking points on an issue that somebody could have gotten by reading the Denver Post anyway. I mean,
Right.
our reason for existing is to add value.
Absolutely.
I don't have a lot to add, speaking of adding value. I would say in that email exchange, David in particular, and kudos to David, is a stickler for that point of, is this something where we can either break new ground or add value? He and I don't always have reach the same conclusion about what that subject is or what that subject is not, but I think that is one of the primary considerations, is that we're not just repeating what you can get on a dozen CNN or MSNBC or Fox shows, that there's something new here that we can contribute.
Talking about just trying to see what's on people's minds and what they're talking about, and see if our 4 topics are reflective of that.
I'll also add one thing. When you have a panel like this, are the best fact checkers in the business. So just this morning, as we're going through the script, David found, like, well, that line's not technically accurate. So it's actually very nice for both Gabrielle can kind of lean on them, knowing that we have 4 folks as a safety net. Other questions? Yep.
I don't have a question. I have a compliment. And I
We'd
want
love
to
to hear that.
thank the panel, because if you watch any other panels on television, they all talk at the same time, they all interrupt each other at the same time, and they never do that. So it makes such great listening. So thank you.
We just kick ourselves.
I always want to interrupt Patty, but I know I have to answer to you.
Yeah, that's all right. We a pretty good nickname a while back Peter Boyles gave us when he hosted the show was the McLaughlin Group on Prozac. So we like to get along, and we pride ourselves in that. So thank you for noticing. Appreciate that. Other questions? We got one up here. Oh, we have a couple more.
Do you have plans for a time travel episode coming up?
Thank you for bringing that up. Our friend over there on the audio mixer, Larry Patchett, is my co-producer with our Time Machine shows. We've been very happy to do those. David Kopel was the inspiration for that. That actually inspired us. Hey, we can probably do the show as if it was a whole different year. We've been successful. We've just this last a couple months ago, we won our fifth Emmy for doing this kind of time machines. We've had 7 Emmy nominations, and we have some of the greatest hams in the business in Patty and David. And on those shows, we have bringing Kevin Flynn and Danny Newsom as well. Patty, David, do you guys have a favorite?
Well, can Larry reveal what the next one's going to be?
That's true. You can give a preview. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, as a good audio guy, he'll wait for the microphone.
I learned sound as a singer. I don't need a microphone. There's very few rules that Dominic gives me when it comes to what next year is. It has to be divisible by 10 or 25. That's about the only rule that there is. At this point, we've now, over the past decade, made 13 trips to the exciting past of Colorado, and 1 trip into the future in the year 2025. Think Green Tea Party. That's all I'm going to tell you. Next year, we've kind of got 2 big holes, and I gave Dominic a choice of either 1920 or 1940. Dominic chose 1940, and I can give you a little bit of a hint. About a week ago, I was in the Denver Public Library looking at the Denver Post for the month of January 1940, and I discovered one of the big topics. They're trying to figure out what to do with all the revenue from alcohol sales.
So you can tell it's going to be a lot of fun. Time for one more question. Anything out there? Let me show we got. Oh, right there.
I'm just curious where you do some of your research. I'll listen to you talking in the evening, and it's like, oh, I'd like to find out more about this. But what are some of your prime sources of? You said newspapers. You've referred to blog sites and that. What are some of your personal favorites for each one of you?
When we kick off the script, I can tell you right now, I'm still old school. I was taught by our initial producer of the show, Barbara Jabali, who created it way back in 1992. We always had the two newspapers back then, so it was always the Rocky and Denver Post. Now it's Denver Post. I'm still old school paper. Gabrielle's new school. She has it on her iPad. I also go to some aggregator sites like Complete Colorado, and I also go to Colorado Independent. And then I also have the best research team here, well-researched themselves. So I'll hand it off right off to you guys.
Well, and one of these, there are a lot of interesting stories out there, but we would have to explain them if they weren't out there in the public media already. So we wouldn't have enough time to explain them and then have opinions on them too. So we do work, off what's hit the mainstream. Although sometimes I will tell you, because I've just gotten a press release about something that's breaking momentarily. But to do research, it's great to be able to go to the original sources, like to go to this AP history thing. So just go Google and see as close as you can get to not someone's report on it, not a media outlet, but what really was said, what's really on the agenda at the Jeffco School Board. And all that stuff is usually available online.
Yeah, you've got to start with the Denver Post. I mean, for this show, which is Colorado-centric, it's the newspaper of record, and then it depends on the topic if you'd go to other papers or some government website, which hopefully will have information, or look up cases on legal databases. But the Post is just foundational, and it's not as good as it used to be, but I think it's essential for well-informed citizenship in Colorado.
Eric?
I agree with everything said. I don't have one go-to site, obviously. I think everyone here reads pretty voraciously, reads news. The Post is essential. I agree that Complete Colorado is a good aggregator of news on a statewide level. For national topics, and even though we don't touch on them that many, it's not the core focus of the show. I'm a big fan of the site Real Clear Politics, realclearpolitics.com. I think it's a great aggregator of opinion and news on both sides of the aisle. I guess the thing I really try to do is read both sides and not get caught into one mindset.
I pretty much agree with everything that's been said. The only other thing I'll do differently is if we've got a political topic coming up and I have some sense that it's a hot issue, knowing people on both sides of the aisle, I may call a campaign and just ask, what were you guys thinking? And just try to get a sense, and won't attribute necessarily to anybody, but just to get a sense of what's going on behind the scenes.
I want to go ahead and wrap us up with a few thank yous. First, I want to thank the crew. You see them working here in the center, but this was a long day for them because they did our noon show as well. The gentleman you see right behind the computer is Steven Zinn. He's our director when he's not here. The gentleman next to him is Patrick Logan. He does our graphics for the show. And the two camera gentlemen, the gentleman in the Broncos hat, very stylish, is Adrian Eatman, one of our camera people. And Ryan Escamilla is next to him. He takes care of engineering and camera and any other lighting things we can throw at him. I know, and Sarah Newberry, you've met before, our floor director. And of course, I want to thank the folks here at Highlands Ranch, and of course, Larry Patchett, our audio guy, who's also here for our show. And then finally, the folks at Highlands Ranch Library that have helped us out, Lisa Casper and Sheila Kerber are both here. And I mentioned before, Tina Poliseo, this was her brainchild. Grateful for their support in help make this happen. And again, thank you. We thought this would be kind of fun to do, but we had absolutely no idea what it would be like. We just thought, well, what the heck? If not, we'll at least talk to the cameras. We're used to that. So we are grateful for all of you coming out, for being a part of it. And we will see you next Friday at 8 p.m. Thank you.